Bob Herbert's op-ed.tv is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation with the support of Ann Ulnick. Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to op-ed.tv. Dexter Gordon was one of those people who was well known, but who I wish was even better known. He was an extraordinary jazz musician, a tenor saxophonist and composer, and he played the lead role in the best jazz movie ever made, Around Midnight, directed by the French filmmaker Bertram Tavern. Dexter wanted his story written, but his planned autobiography was unfinished at the time of his death in 1990. It is my great privilege to have as my guest Dexter's widow, Maxine Gordon, who has completed the project of telling Dexter's story in a wonderful new book, Sophisticated Giant, The Life and Legacy of Dexter Gordon. Maxine, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming in. I really appreciate it. It's a terrific book, so congratulations.
Great, thank you.
So Dexter entered the jazz scene as a performer at a really pivotal period. It was in the 1940s, early 50s. The big band era was winding down. Bebop was emerging. You correctly point out that he became a giant of the music. Why was Dexter so important to jazz, and what role did he specifically play in that pivotal period?
Well, as he said, it was timing. You know, he was born in 1923, so when he went on the road with Lionel Hampton, he's 17, 1940.
17.
Or 39, 40. So sometimes he'd be talking about Charlie Parker or Dizzy, and he'd say to people, you know, she missed everything. She's born too late. He felt that he was there in the greatest moment, which probably every artists think.
But it was critically important in jazz.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really funny. I was born in 1945, and I used to say when I was a kid I was the son of bebop. But that was when bebop emerged, and it really was a profound new version of jazz coming at the end of the big band era. And a lot of the, as you know, a lot of the big names from the big band era did not like bebop. They did not take to these new kids on the block.
But Dexter felt like that was exaggerated also, because
is that right?
He felt that Louis Armstrong knew what they were doing. And yesterday I was in the Louis Armstrong collection at Queens College with somebody, and they have his record collection. They have Louis Armstrong 2,000 albums that he had, and they pulled out, Porgy and Bess, Sketch of Spain. He had all those and listened to them.
And Dexter played with Louis.
Yes, 1944.
Wow. He's always described as larger than life, and in part because he was 6'5", 6'6", or thereabouts. And he did have a big personality, at least, as fans, you could see that. But for the people who were close to him, what was his personality really like? How would you describe it?
Well, what he said was the person who went on stage and performed was Society Red. That was how he referred to himself. That was his nickname. But the person at home, first of all, he was an avid reader, which, we already had this conversation. People say, a jazz musician reads books, and
Isn't that something?
and really? He was an avid reader, and he loved baseball, and, he liked theater and movies, and, but he was quiet.
Well, we should point out, he grew up in Los Angeles, and his father was a doctor who had, and I found this out in your book, quite an extraordinary clientele.
Yeah.
And folks like Duke Ellington would come over to the house for dinner. I got jealous
Me too.
just reading those paragraphs. But what was it about Dexter's music that turned people on so early? I mean, he became big really young.
Well, I think it's the sound. He had a sound that communicated with people, something, I'm not a musicologist, but something about the timbre of his tone cut through and people could feel it. And he worked on that because he wanted to be Lester Young, or he thought he was Lester Young, actually, you know, I mean, he, in his mind, which is then what happens is the younger tenor players think they're Dexter. You know, John Coltrane, Jimmy Heath wanted to be Dexter, and he wanted to be Lester Young.
He influenced so many.
Yeah.
But he had the ability to play that new music, bebop, which is very, very difficult to play. I mean, in addition to your musical knowledge, your technique has to be extraordinary. So,
well, he practiced.
So you address in your book, and very candidly, the lows as well as the highs of Dexter's life, and there were many highs, and we'll get to some of those. But he struggled, especially in the, I guess, in the 50s. Late 40s and especially in the 50s. And so he had a drug problem. And so if you could talk about that a little bit, about his experience with drugs at that time, mostly in Los Angeles, but on the road as well. But then also the kind of gruesome laws that they had in Los Angeles at the time.
Yeah, the section of the book on the 50s, what we call the 50s, I mean, they kind of overlap, he was leaving out of the book, as you know.
He didn't want to talk about these things, right?
He in an outline that he didn't want to make, but did make, he went from 48 to 60. And
as if the 50s had never happened.
And so I pointed out that it's a decade, and he was like, I'm not putting it in the book. And after discussion, argument, he was like, well, if you want it in the book, you'll have to write it yourself, which I did.
Right.
Because even though he said that, he knew I was going to write that.
Right.
He knew, I know he knew. Because that period in Los Angeles in particular and in California, under a health code, internal possession of drugs was illegal, and 90 days. You got 90 days if you had marks, or they had a test, which they tested the pupil dilation, which was proved erroneous.
Right.
Then you went to jail. So
that means if there was an indication, an external indication that you had drugs in your system, that was a crime.
It was a crime, but under a health code, not under criminal law.
Right.
And it was overturned by the Supreme Court.
Later.
Later. He was already in Europe, a man who took it to the Supreme Court who didn't live long enough to see it. But no, and also, you know, I quote from books, a book from a detective saying, we went after the jazz musicians because it was easy because they always congregated around Central Avenue.
In San Francisco, in Los Angeles, which was,
so they
Central
could
Avenue was a
find
big deal in the jazz scene.
Right, we like
in Los
52nd
Angeles
Street
at that time. Yeah. So, how serious was his drug problem?
Oh yeah, serious. Yeah, no,
heroin.
He had a heroin addiction, and he often went to jail, and then he went to prison. He went to Chino prison, where they made a movie called Unchained.
Right.
And many musicians were there. They had a band. They had a band in prison, you know, with the
because there were so many musicians.
Right. And they had a band in the county jail.
Right.
And I think, you know, I told this story about the drummer Lawrence Marable, who checked himself in to the LA County Jail, and Dexter said, you know, really was my good friend because he wanted to look after me. And Lawrence said, no, I thought you'd find a better drummer.
That's funny. But drugs was such an important and in many cases devastating part of the jazz scene. The famous one, of course, is Charlie Parker, Bird, and then he was such a powerful force that there were all these other musicians who felt, you know, they wanted to be like Bird.
Well, it was so prevalent, and it was so easily accessible. It was very cheap, and it was very common. And of course, what he said was, you know, we had no idea how addictive it was and how long it would take to get off.
So the 50s was this very tough period for Dexter.
No recording, nothing.
And then he goes to Europe in the early 60s. Talk about that.
Well, things started to get better around 1960, but he couldn't leave California. If he left, he had to come back because he had to be on parole.
Right.
So he'd get permission to go and then have to come back. But finally, when he was free of that system, he was gone. Because he came to New York. He met Ronnie Scott, who had the club in London, who invited him, and famous moment, would you fancy coming to London? He was
I always
like,
wished I could have
yes.
gone to Ronnie Scott's
Right?
in London. It was
It's
such a
there
famous
now,
place.
but
You know.
it's a little different.
Right,
but
it's
they
not the same.
it would be like going to Birdland here. It's
Right.
not,
Right.
what it was. But I got to go there when he was still living
Wow.
in Peking. It was great. But he said, yes, I'd love to come. He didn't have a passport. He got a passport. He said, got new shoes. He got, like you do. He got
Right.
shirts. And he went for 2 weeks, and they stayed 14 years.
So he had an engagement at
London.
Ronnie Scott's in London.
2 weeks. Mhm.
2-week engagement. How did he come? And he didn't stay in England. How did he come to spend all those years in Europe?
Well, as he said, I went for 2 weeks, and when I looked up, it was 14 years. because he was in London, and people knew, and, it was in the paper, people read the paper, and maybe on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
Then they invited him to Copenhagen, to Montmartre, so he was like, okay, and they invited him to Paris. He went there, and he just kept moving, and as he said, I had to buy another suitcase and more clothes, and, have to have clothes made because he was so big. And he worked, it was really about working. It was about working because he didn't work in the States all those
Right.
years, and then he didn't have a cabaret card. So if he stayed in New York, he could only work like on Sundays.
The cabaret card, if I understand it correctly, they don't have that in New York anymore. But
Well, they
if you
had it. Mm-hmm.
if you were a musician, you had to have a cabaret card to work in an establishment that sold alcohol.
Right.
Is that correct?
Right.
So clubs and
Right,
and that sort of-
exactly.
So if you didn't have a cabaret card because you
can't
were
work.
convicted of a crime,
Right.
you couldn't work.
Which
It was a
meant
problem that
that
Billie Holiday had. big
Billie
time.
Holiday, Jackie McLean,
Yeah.
many people, Sonny Rollins, they all
Right.
had that problem. Miles is really the one who fought it and
Wow.
helped overturn it, he and J.J. Johnson.
So talk a little bit about Dexter's experience in Europe. He became a big star in Europe, where they have a real appreciation of jazz as an art form. But he also had some trouble in Europe.
Well, he
He was
something he used to
Dexter.
say, trouble follows, or what he used to say is, the thing about bad times is good times follow bad times. He said, it's the good times you have to watch out for. That was like,
Because
he
the
was an
bad times were
optimist,
coming,
right?
right.
He was an optimist.
So
but
what
Europe
happened?
was, for him, it was a great moment because he had remembered once, and Nat King Cole said to him, you have to go to Europe. See, that was very early, way before the 50s. He said, you have to go. They give you flowers. They give you flowers. They love the music. They give you, and Dexter
That did
always
not happen
remembered.
at jazz clubs in the
No,
US.
that was not happening. And when he went, he said the people knew him from the recordings, from the 40s. They had the recordings because the guys in the army had the dial in Savoy. They brought
Right.
them with them, so they knew who he was, and so they wanted him to play in that way. He didn't play in that way anymore, but it was he worked all the time.
But
And
he also-
I looked at I was thinking of mapping like itineraries, and I mean the travel. You go from Finland to Spain.
Right. But he also, he started a family, and then that
didn't
didn't
work
work out. That was in Denmark?
Denmark,
Yeah,
uh-huh.
okay. And then he got in trouble in Paris. He got in
did.
trouble with drugs in Paris. What happened?
He got busted in Paris, '66, for buying drugs, not which he said, oh dear, Napoleonic Code, which means you're guilty till
Guilty until
proven.
proven
And
innocent,
he
yeah.
said that was a big mistake, and
Right.
it was just he was there, he went, and they got busted, and that took quite a few months, to get out of that, and then he was done. He was done.
That's when he kicked the habit.
Well, he had already kicked. I mean, if we call it kicked, he had
Why was he
stopped for
buying drugs?
years. Well, you don't have to have a habit to return like momentarily to that life when you're in a certain environment and other people get high, and they were like, okay, he said the same thing happens with drinking. You might be, in AA and be doing really well, and then, you fall off.
Right.
He fell off.
But this time, he stopped for good.
He said that was it when they put him in prison in Paris. Yeah.
All right. So then he comes. Well, before we get him back in the States, how did you guys hook up? How did you hook up with Dexter Gordon?
1975.
I mean, who were you and where were you and what were you doing?
Just a lucky girl. I was working as a road manager for an agent, a booking agent. He was in Holland. He booked Ben Webster. He booked all the bands. And I had traveled with...
But you were from New York.
I'm from New York, but I got a job thanks to the great drummer Louis Hayes, who I either thank or blame, who once said, oh, she can do it, before I knew what I was going to do. And I went as a road manager for Berlin Jazz Festival,
Right.
Groups of people, and somehow I was good at it. Or as my editor pointed out, you seem organized because of the people around you who are less
so
organized.
disorganized.
So I thought I was very organized
Chaos.
till he pointed that out. But I got a job as a road manager for this agent, and I traveled with Clifford Jordan, Billy Higgins,
Wow.
Cedar Walton, Sam Jones. That was, great. And then we'd go 6 weeks, come back, another 6 weeks. So I was always in Europe traveling with the bands. And then there was going to be a train strike. That's very common in France. And Dexter's band had to travel, and so they sent me to get them, like to Italy, to get them to Scandinavia. The train book, we didn't have cell phone. Okay, no cell phone,
no internet.
no, a book. This thick, like the old New York phone
Telephone
book,
book,
right?
yeah.
And it had all the trains in Europe. So I was like the queen of the train book, Dexter was like, is that the only book you read? I was like, for now, yeah. So I met him at a concert in Nancy, and we started talking about him coming back and how he wanted to come back. And it's, I write about it. And so that started like a professional relationship. And then later, I broke the rule, and I married.
rule and hooked
I
up.
married in, they said. That's what they say where I lived. Oh, she married in.
But you helped facilitate his return to the States, right?
Yes,
Okay.
he did. It was his idea.
He wanted to come back.
I mean, and he paid for it.
Right.
He had saved money to come back, but he wasn't sure how to do it. So we worked on it together for 6 months, and he came back.
Now, Dexter was a big name in jazz, but as you pointed out, he hadn't been recording in the 1950s. He'd spending these years in the 60s in Europe. He comes back to the States, and he becomes, I don't know if suddenly is the right word, but in a very short,
seems like suddenly,
very short period of time, he became an enormous star. What was that about? Why did that happen? How did it happen? What happened?
What happened really was Bruce Lundvall. Bruce Lundvall was the president of Columbia Records, and he loved jazz. Oh, and he loved Dexter. So, and he was it's a very unusual thing, honest person in a business that doesn't always attract the most.
The most honest.
No, hardly.
individuals.
But he was, and he loved Dexter.
So he's a record executive who was honest.
Yes. And he signed him to Columbia Records. And then they did the first recording, Homecoming Live. And because of the distribution and publicity and the whole, all these people working on Dexter, then, he was able to seem like he's back. That was the thing, he's back. But really, the jazz critics had written about him as if he was like the lost years, they forgot him. But really, in Europe, he'd
been playing all the time.
And he was, a big star in Europe. But we didn't have, like we have now, that people know what's happening.
Right.
So it had to do with Columbia Records. And also then he went on tour, and he went everywhere on tour.
And of course, by this time, Dexter had a big sound always anyway. He had a big, mature sound.
Right. He had
now.
really played what he said, the way he wanted to play.
Right. So if you went to see Dexter Gordon at a
You
show,
remember.
Exactly, and then word of mouth in addition to all the publicity you were talking
Exactly.
about. But also, all the jazz stars, and I remember this, all the jazz stars of the era were crazy about Dexter. They would go to see him perform. I mean, it was really impressive. Then came Round Midnight.
Yeah.
Right, so I knew about Dexter Gordon. I was a fan of Dexter Gordon. But when the movie Round Midnight came out, I was thinking, really? Dexter's going to play the lead in this film? I was really interested, and then I saw it, and like everyone else, just blown away. It's a staggering performance. But how did that happen? How did he come to become the star of this movie?
Well, it also has something to do with Bruce Lundvall, who got a phone call from Henri Renaud saying there's a French director who wants to make a movie about jazz, and he's looking for someone, and he wants a real musician. And Bruce said, yeah, Dexter. And Henri Renaud said, yes, Dexter. So then Bertram flew over. But the producer of the movie is really important, and that's Irwin Winkler.
Who you wouldn't expect to be producing this kind of a movie.
No. He did the Rocky movies.
Right.
He's a big Hollywood producer, but he loved Bertram Tavern. They were friends, but he also admired his work. And, you know, they were kind of in the circle with Scorsese and, you know, at that time. And so Irwin is the one who got the money. I mean, we can say how great Bertrand is and Dexter, but if you don't have Warner Brothers paying for it, you don't have a movie.
Right.
And it became an American movie, even with a French director. So that's how he was able to be nominated.
But how is it that he knew how to act to the extent that he could play the lead in a major motion picture?
Well, he thought that they were always acting, and he was like, you know, Billy Eckstine could have been a movie star, Billie Holiday could have been one, you know, Coleman Hawkins, these people are acting, you know, Duke Ellington, you know, and he said, I have to do it for them who didn't get a chance. He was always thinking about what it would mean to the past, to jazz. But he didn't think, he thought he could act. I mean, he could act.
Well, yeah, he could act, because I was just going to say.
He felt like he could, you know what I mean? It wasn't, to him, it was like, oh, I could do this.
Not only could he act, and he was wonderful in the performance, he was nominated for an Academy Award as best lead actor in a motion picture.
The 5th black actor ever in that.
That was incredible.
I know, and he wasn't surprised. That was really, you know, to me.
He wasn't surprised that he was nominated.
Right. That's like the incredible moment where he was like, you know, pack your bags. I read about that. That was the joke. Pack your bags.
It's a wonderful film, and as I mentioned at the top, I mean, I think it's without argument the best jazz movie ever made.
And it holds up.
It's a fantastic movie. We've only got a minute left, but you had a chapter in the book called "A Night at the Oscars." Tell us what it was like to go to the Oscars when your husband is up for lead actor in a motion picture.
And your husband, you know, is already prepared what to wear. You know, when the minute Martin Scorsese said, you're going to the Oscars, I was like, oh, we're not going to the Oscars. And he was like, what are you going to wear?
Because he was so impressed by, Martin was so impressed by their performance.
And he's in the film, you know. But I didn't believe till the day it was announced that we were going. So, you know, I was like, oh my God, we're going to the Oscars. But the man the great designer who made Dexter's clothes, had already made something for me. Without, like,
so he designed
and brought
your
it to California.
Outfit as well.
Yeah, he brought 3 outfits. So
and there you guys were on the red carpet.
It was a great night.
Well, anyway, it's a fantastic. By the way, who won for Best Actor? Oh, Paul Newman. I've heard of him. I wish we had more time. Maxine Gordon, thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, so great.
We'll be back in a moment with a final word. One of my favorite songs is Baby It's Cold Outside by Frank Lesser, who also wrote the music and lyrics to one of the all-time great Broadway musicals, Guys and Dolls. If you haven't heard Ray Charles and Betty Carter's version of this song, do it as soon as you can. It's a masterpiece. Somehow, Baby It's Cold Outside has gotten on the wrong side of the New Puritans, who have managed in a masterpiece of twisted logic to associate it with date rape. They're wrong. It's a song about flirtation in which a grown-up man and a grown-up woman are engaged in a playful and witty dance of mutual seduction. Lesser wrote the song in 1944 for himself and his wife Lynn to perform at parties. Their friends went wild over it. As Lynn would later write about one of their performances, well, the room just fell apart. We had to do it over and over again. Despite what the critics are now saying, the woman in the song is not the victim of an imbalance of power. She is fully engaged in the flirtation and fully capable of making her own decisions about her behavior. She doesn't need the protection of people in the 21st century making their stern judgments, just like her maiden aunt in the lyric, and projecting them back over 7.5 decades that they know little or nothing about. Baby It's Cold Outside is a fun song. It's a shame that in some quarters it has been spoiled by folks who can't tell the difference between a playful flirtation and sexual abuse. That's all for now. See you next time.